Elise and I are back this week with another scary story. This one is a supposedly true story about a sailing ship named the Mary Celeste. The mystery began on the afternoon of December 4th, 1872. The British sailing ship De Gradia was about 600 miles off the coast of Portugal. The lookout reported spotting a sail on the horizon. As the two ships drew closer, Captain David Morehouse of the De Gradia observed the other ship through his telescope and recognized it as the Mary Celeste, but something was clearly wrong. Some of the sails were missing, and the ship was wallowing from side to side in the heavy seas. Captain Morehouse could see no one at the wheel and nobody on the deck. Morehouse hailed the ship again and again, but no one answered his calls. He decided to investigate and ordered a small boat launched with a crew of 3. A few minutes later, the 3 sailors stood on the deck of the Mary Celeste. They stamped their feet on the deck and shouted. There was no answer. The seamen went below deck and looked into the cabins, the galley, and the cargo hold. Finally, they had searched the entire ship. There wasn't a person on board. The ship was drifting along without her crew. The ship itself seemed to be in good condition. The pumps were working below deck, there were no leaks, and even the sails were in fairly good shape. The cargo, 1,700 casks of industrial alcohol, was still lashed in place. A small yawl carried on the deck of the Mary Celeste and used as a lifeboat was gone. Also missing were some navigational instruments and some of the ship's papers, but the logbook was still in the captain's cabin. The last entry was dated November 24th, almost 2 weeks earlier. It gave no hint of any trouble. The crew must have abandoned the Mary Celeste in a great hurry. The captain had left the logbook and his clothing. The crew had not only left their clothing, but other personal belongings as well. It was common knowledge that sailors would only leave their tobacco behind if they were in great danger, and they did. But what could that danger have been? The boarders could find absolutely nothing wrong with the ship. There was plenty of food and water on board. It's true that sailors abandon burning or sinking ships at sea, but why abandon an undamaged ship? Even if the Mary Celeste had been caught in a storm, the large ship would still have been safer than a small lifeboat, and there was no sign of fire or any other damage. In fact, the boarding party of 3 seamen was able to sail the Mary Celeste 600 miles to Gibraltar all by themselves. Could pirates have boarded the ship and done away with the crew? Could there have been a mutiny? Neither seemed likely. In either case, there would have been signs of a struggle, but there were none. The pirates would have taken more than just a few instruments. Mutineers would certainly have taken their clothing and tobacco, and there just seemed to be no reason for the crew to be gone. Even before this Mary Celeste was found abandoned, the ship seemed to be unlucky. She had been built in Nova Scotia and launched in 1861. Her original name was the Amazon. Her first captain died just 2 days after he took command. On her first voyage, she suffered damage to her hull. While the damage was being repaired, a fire broke out. Her second captain lost his job because of these misfortunes. Her third captain sailed her across the Atlantic and promptly ran into another ship in the Strait of Dover. She was repaired once again and sailed home with still another captain. A few years later, the Amazon ran aground on Cape Breton Island and was badly damaged. This time, the Amazon was completely rebuilt and sold to new owners. They renamed her the Mary Celeste and planned to sail her under an American flag. The new captain was Benjamin Briggs. He was just 38 years old, but had spent most of those years at sea. He had been a captain of 3 previous ships and had the reputation of being a good sailor. Briggs and Captain Morehouse of the De Gradia were good friends. They dined together the night before the Mary Celeste was set to sail. Briggs took his wife and infant daughter along with him on the newly rebuilt ship's first voyage. He certainly did not seem nervous. Weeks later, when Captain Morehouse found the abandoned Mary Celeste, he may have felt sorry for his friend, but Morehouse knew the Mary Celeste would bring him a good profit. Under laws of the sea, he could claim part of the value of the abandoned ship and its cargo. Morehouse's friendship with Briggs seemed suspicious to the Attorney General of Gibraltar. He decided to try to prove that Morehouse was responsible for whatever had happened to the Mary Celeste, but there was very little evidence of that. In fact, the Attorney General could come up with only 3 bits of possible foul play. First, there was a small cut in the ship's railing. Second, Briggs's sword was found beneath his bunk and had a few rust spots that may have been blood. Third, the last log entry had been made hundreds of miles from where the Mary Celeste had been found. Members of a naval court were not impressed by this evidence. The cut railing could have been an accident. The spots on the sword didn't even really look like blood, and ship's logs were often made out days later than they should have been. Besides, there was no sign of any struggle at all. Captain Morehouse and his crew were quickly cleared of any wrongdoing. The court was also supposed to come up with their opinion on what really happened to Mary Celeste. But after 3 months of investigations, they could find no evidence of any kind. They admitted they could find no explanation for the disappearance of Captain Briggs and his crew. In the years that followed, all kinds of explanations were offered. Some said the ship was attacked by monsters from the depths of the sea, like giant squids or whales. Others thought sickness aboard the ship or pirates were responsible. More recent explanations involved the crew being abducted by UFOs or visitors from outer space. About the time of the trial, the Mary Celeste owner came up with an explanation that at least seems possible. He suggested some of the alcohol in the cargo may have leaked. Hot weather might have evaporated the alcohol and built up enough gas pressure to blow open a hatch cover. Briggs may have mistakenly thought fire caused the explosion and ordered the crew to abandon ship. The small lifeboat would have been swamped in the rough seas. This would leave the ship empty and yet perfectly sound. But any explosion could not have been a large one because there was no evidence of damage. In fact, there is nothing to prove that any of this explanation is correct. To this day, no one has been able to come up with a satisfactory explanation. To this day, the disappearance of the crew remains one of the most puzzling sea mysteries of all time. So this is from a book called Strange Mysteries from Around the World by Seymour Simon. And so you can check out this book at the library to read about more strange occurrences that happen around the world.